I think most of our suffering comes from not knowing how to be aligned with who we really are. I think there's something about really living in our authenticity that creates a tremendous amount of peace and equanimity. And I think that authenticity inherently connects us to the divine and to the oneness of all things. And we're connected to the one infinite field of intelligence, which is what Einstein said. And so when we come back to that part of our identity, which is the essence of us, that alleviates so much suffering. Because when you're coming from a place of wholeness, then you don't need to protect yourself from other people's energy because you project your energy. And so you can just be loving and you can just give people grace and understand that the reason they came up with that story about you is because of everything that they believed up until then. One of the reasons why I like teaching manifestation, and one of the reasons why I've been able to manifest a lot of beauty in my life, is because I never set out to manifest something that was somewhere else. And I never felt like I had to be patient until it comes, because all of that's an illusion. Instead, it was about
Have you ever wondered if you could transform your life by tuning into your true self and aligning with your inner energy? Well, in this episode, Cathy Heller, a beacon of inspiration, shares her profound journey from witnessing her mother's struggle with depression to discovering that suffering is optional. Cathy delves deep into the art of manifestation, teaching us that everything we desire is already accessible and how shifting our energy and mindset can unlock these elevated potentials. By living from a place of wholeness and abundance rather than lack, Cathy reveals how we can naturally attract more love, connection, and purpose. She also tackles common entrepreneurial challenges, advocating for a balance between intuitive intelligence and strategic planning, and offers enlightening insights on transforming our relationship with money. So it's now time to tune into this one very inspirational human being. Enjoy. So, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on which side of the globe you are sitting on at this very moment. I have another special guest for you. We have the beautiful Cathy Heller. Welcome to the show.
thank you. Thank you for having me.
I have to say, I am super excited. I have been watching and following what you're doing, and it sounds magnificent. So, I can't wait to unpack some of these topics. But before we get started, Cathy, we always love to ask our guests, what inspired you to do what you do today?
It's such a beautiful question that you start every episode with. I love that question. I heard someone once say that we do everything that we do on some level for our mothers, which I think is really interesting. And I think when you asked me that, I would have answered the question similarly with what has to do with my mom, because growing up, my mom was really struggling with her sense of purpose, and she was really sad. And my parents had a pretty awful marriage and then an even worse divorce. And I watched her really kind of spiral into a very deep, dark depression for a long time. And I heard it once said that pain is inevitable, it's part of life, but suffering is more optional. And I think I do this podcast and write the books I write and speak about the topics I speak about because I think that there's a way out of the suffering. I think that the pain is part of being human, and it's actually heartbreakingly beautiful, grief and pain and all of those kinds of contrasting things. But there is an unnecessary amount of suffering that I do think we can change, and we don't have to be in it. And there's so much more beauty to receive. And so I think because I grew up in the home that I grew up in, I was on a mission to find a different path and to look for different answers and to ask different questions. So I think that's probably why I do what I do.
I would love to unpack what you just said about suffering is optional. And I'd love to get a better understanding. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think that like the deepest form of suffering comes from identity. And I think a lot of times we don't know who we are because we're very identified with the mind. We're very identified with our ego, and it's a person we're pretending to be because we're so much more than that. We're this consciousness that is it was, it will be, it was who we are as soon as we were conceived, that sort of electric shock of energy. And it's the unchanging self. You know, if you ask somebody, who are you? Well, would you define yourself by your height? Because your height has changed a bunch of times. Would you define yourself by your friends? Well, your friends have changed a bunch of times. Would you define yourself by the kind of ice cream you like? So there's an essential self that has never changed. It's the essence of who we are. I think most of our suffering comes from not knowing how to be aligned with who we really are. I think there's something about really living in our authenticity that creates a tremendous amount of peace and equanimity. And I think that that authenticity inherently connects us to the divine and to the oneness of all things. And I think when we're connected to God and we're connected to the one infinite field of intelligence, which is what Einstein said, we see the world in 3 dimensions. Einstein said there's actually 10 dimensions. So when people say, well, the reality is, they're making up a fake version of reality, when Einstein knew a little bit more about reality than most of us. And he said reality is so much more expansive, and there's this one infinite field. And so when we come back to that part of our identity, which is the essence of us, that alleviates so much suffering. And then from there, I think the second piece is how we choose to see the world. And when we see the world through a lens that is subjective and limited, we're unhappy. And when we put on the glasses to see the world as it really is, which is infinite and expansive and not net neutral, but net positive, we start to feel so excited about how we can create. And I think that we see through our eyes very poorly, and we tend to see much further with our eyes closed. And so that's why when we meditate or pray or make a wish, like there tends to be a instinct to close our eyes so we can actually see. And so I think a lot of the suffering of who we are, and then the other confusion is, what is the world? And the more that we know who we are and where we are, where God is, what the universe is connected to, and what we're really looking at, then I don't think there's much suffering at all. In fact, it's pretty hard to suffer when you're clear about those things.
I love that. I've just got goosebumps because it's true. We are truth, love, and light. And yet we find it so difficult to stand in our truth. I mean, I always talk about it, but sometimes I have to admit that I find it hard sometimes to stand in my truth in fear of upsetting somebody else or in fear of. So, how do we do that? How can we stand in our truth and be our authentic self without the concerns of how others may perceive our communication or the meaning or anything like that? How do we do that?
I think it's a really great question. And I think part of it is really going deep into the work of what we were just talking about, because even the question itself is coming from the wounded self, right? The higher self doesn't ask that question, but we all have a nervous system that is pretty dysregulated because it is plugged into the mind, and it is plugged into the old mind, which is constantly wanting to protect us. And so the mind, this ego, loves us so much that it's constantly trying to protect us from danger. And so if anything remotely seems scary, it will create all those thoughts so that you don't bump into something that you experienced when you were 3 or 4 or 7 or 10 years old. So what starts to happen, the answer to the question is, the more we practice memorizing our way back to an elevated state of consciousness where we can put the nervous system in a more ease regulated state, the more we have dominion over our life, as opposed to constantly being in the washing machine snow globe of all of the old wounded thoughts, because essentially what's happening is all day long we're walking around pretty unconscious, and we have these thoughts that are mostly there to protect us, so they come from fear. But those thoughts don't come out of nowhere. They actually come from feelings that we're carrying around, and those feelings have just not been dealt with or processed. And so the more we signal to our body that we're safe, whether it's through walking, grounding, putting your feet in the grass, letting it touch the earth, meditation, dance, the kinds of ways that we rewire ourselves into the actual present moment and find real safety here, we can override what we've been kind of signaling in ourselves. And what's scary is that when we think a thought like, what will people think, or whatever that is, it signals a lot of cortisol to literally drip from our brain into our cells. And so that cortisol is more addictive than nicotine. So what happens is we actually get addicted on a physical level to feeling bad. And then the shame and the guilt gives us that hit in our cells, and it's a loop. What I'll also say, just to take it in a different direction, is when you ask yourself, well, I would like to stand in my truth, but what about what other people might think? So we just said a few things about where that comes from, that fear. And something that's really nice to think about is the only thing that we can't ever control is how other people choose to perceive and what meaning people make of things. And so what I like people to remember is the people who see you, they don't see you. They see whatever they're willing to see, period. So you can let it go. It's very liberating, because they're going to make up whatever meaning they're willing to make up based on whatever past experience and evidence they're looking for. If they're looking for a certain belief, they'll find it in everything, right? So what's really helpful to remember is there are already people who don't see you and have made meaning out of who you are and misinterpreted you. And you're totally surviving that. And you, me, all of us right now have perceived somebody and made a story out of them. And we don't need to tell them about it, but there's plenty of people that you and I, in our own, we get in the car and turn to our husband and say, that person rubs me the wrong way. And that's okay. And that person really, it's none of their business. They don't need to change who they are necessarily, because I've made that meaning out of it. And the last thing I'll say is nobody cares, because people's brains and bodies and whole destinies are so self-serving. They don't spend enough time thinking about us. So for us to live our life in protection of what we think we could control about the way people perceive us, A, that's a waste of time because you can't. But B, even if you did it perfectly, it wouldn't matter, because they'll spend about 3 minutes thinking about you. And even if you have the most juicy story, they'll go to lunch with their friend and they'll bring it up, and then they'll say, do you want to split the tuna tartare? Oh my gosh, you can't believe what happened. My mom this, my this, that. Like, no one has the energy or bandwidth to spend enough energy on that for us to be living our life that way. What I would say is the more we heal, the more relaxed we become. Because when you're coming from a place of wholeness, then you don't need to protect yourself from other people's energy, because you project your energy. And so you can just be loving, and you can just give people grace and understand that the reason they came up with that story about you is because of everything that they believed up until then. And so it makes a lot of sense. Like, if someone ever doesn't like me or whatever, I'm like, that makes total sense based upon who you are, where you come from. You made up that story. You're entitled to that. I totally get it. And I don't feel the need to change it. So there's 8 billion people in the world, and we're not meant to know everyone, affect everyone, speak each other's languages. We're just meant to affect the people we're meant to affect. And the very, 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 very last thing I'll say on this topic is you can only hear someone within 7 degrees frequency of where you are. So if you're 8 degrees away from someone else because you're in a state of joy and they're in a state of darkness, or they're in apathy and you're in wherever, if you're beyond 7 degrees from where that person is vibrationally, you're going to miss each other every time. You don't even hear each other or sense each other. So, at any given moment of any given point in life, there's only certain people on your frequency, literally on your wavelength, and everybody else can't hear you anyway. So, I would stop focusing on them.
I've not ever heard of that. I mean, I'm absolutely in agreement with you. I always say that your external world is a representation of your internal world. So I absolutely agree with what you're saying. But from a vibrational frequency point of view, I didn't know there was a 7 degree. Absolutely. What's his name? Hawkins. I'm trying to think of the name of his book when he talks about the different vibrational frequencies depending on where you're at. Can you lift somebody's frequency? Or
So, there,
yeah. Sorry.
yeah, no, I mean, the answer is yes to all of it to a certain degree, right? Because when you put water on the stove, it doesn't boil. It gets hotter and hotter and hotter, and then it boils. So things move through frequency and they get on the right path. So could you move somebody's path? Yeah. But because you're boiling water and you're in bliss and joy and equanimity, can you put them in joy and bliss and equanimity? Well, you can move them towards it. But in order for them to experience it on their own, they're going to have to keep the water on the boil. They're going to have to keep trending to the point where they continue to feel flow state. Can you put someone into flow state? No, you can move them in that direction. So there is a way in which we do tune to one another, and it's helpful because we can shift people and point them toward different trends and different momentum in their vibration. But there is a gap in which somebody might be saying something and resonating at a certain place, and you're not going to quite match it unless you match it, right? Does that make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. So because we have then obviously control to either lift or lower our vibrational frequency depending on where we're at with those individuals, I guess. Because I feel that sometimes I always say nobody can make you feel anything unless you allow them to, which for me kind of links into that vibrational frequency because it's interesting every time I say it, people go, yes, they can. They absolutely can make you feel a certain way. And I think, well, then you've got to play part in that in some way, shape, or form by allowing them. So that goes down to, I'm just trying to think of like how I map that with a vibrational frequency, and that's what comes to mind. It's like you can only lower your vibrational frequency if you allow yourself to go there. Correct?
100%. I mean, you're co-creating it together. So if something's coming up in your life, and we'll talk about this, what I believe manifestation looks like and means. It didn't happen to you. You co-created it. So you're a match. So you're hanging out in the same place on some level, and that's why it's presenting itself, because you need more of that contrast until you'll finally set yourself free of it. So yeah, I mean, those things don't happen to everybody. And when they do, they co-created it. Maybe they were feeling too good. They hit their upper limit. They had to create some drama for themselves. So they created some argument with someone.
I absolutely agree with that. So let's lean into manifestation because that is a topic I'd love to unpack. When we're thinking about manifestation, what exactly does that mean to you?
So the way that I was trained, I had a very unexpected and very delightful sort of Alice in Wonderland journey. I studied world religion and Southeastern Asian religion in college. And then after college, I took a trip to Jerusalem, which was supposed to be 3 weeks. And I stayed in Jerusalem for 3 years. And I met an amazing rabbi who lives in the old city with his 7 children, who is like the genuine real deal. And his wife is also phenomenal. And she knows a lot about astrology and handwriting analysis. And the two of them together know so much on such a deep level of Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism. And I was very fortunate that what you seek is seeking you. And somehow that became part of my life. And so I learned manifestation there. And what I learned is, and by the way, I'll just say for whatever it's worth, I know that some people have heard of the Kabbalah Center. That is not what I'm talking about. I've never walked into the Kabbalah Center. Not that there's anything wrong with it. I'm just kind of talking about a very authentic, like, it would be the equivalent of not walking into a yoga studio and learning a little bit about yoga, but like if you would have gone on some backpacking trip to India and met some real Indian guru who could teach it to you directly, like that was the experience I had, which was really special. And so we were looking at like the totality of Jewish mysticism through his lens. And I was just very blessed to be there in that time. And so what I learned right away is that the word Kabbalah comes from the word likabel. And so that word means to receive. That is what the word means. So all of Jewish wisdom is actually a practice in becoming a receiver. So what I would share with you is that Kabbalah is really about manifestation. And what does that mean? It means that it's not about the law of attraction. The law of attraction is a slightly different idea. So the Kabbalah's interpretation is the law of reception. And that's very special because what that basically says is that everything is already here and we just have to learn to receive it. It's not somewhere else, and it's not in a future time or in a different space. It's here right now, always, and right now, and right now, and right now, but it's hidden in plain sight. And we have to become a receiver so that we can receive whatever those more elevated potentials are that exist right now. So the way that my rabbi explained it to me, which I now teach to other people, is that it's like a radio. So if you had a radio and you put it right next to me right now, I mean, this is not even woo-woo, this is just literal. If you put a radio next to me right this moment, if I wasn't hearing any music and I wanted to hear music, I would turn on the radio, and where there was no music a moment ago in this room, now there would be music. So where did it come from? Well, the music frequency was already here. I just had to turn on the radio to receive it. But then it gets even more delicious because if I want to change the music I hear, I could do that too, as long as I change the station that the radio is tuned to. And then where did that come from? Oh, well, that frequency was here. Oh, well, you mean hidden in plain sight? There was a frequency of salsa music, then there was a frequency of AM radio, then there was a frequency of pop music, the frequency of classical. Correct. It was always already here right now. But what made it become manifest to me is where I tuned my receiver. So the whole idea of manifestation is to be available as a greater vessel, to be a vessel to receive greater, more elevated potentials that are already here. And how do you do that? Is because the world is atomic, and we, like we talked about before, we're not physical. We have a physical aspect, but most of what this is energy. In fact, we can measure it now. We can take pictures of this at UCLA. We can take a picture of the beach ball sphere that is your energetic imprint that you walk around with, that enters the room before you do. So the idea is if that energy, if that ball starts to become coherent, and if that ball starts to become this loving, very potent vibration and resonance, you start to access potentials that were always already here. You start bumping into opportunities and synchronicities that were always already here, but you are now available for them because you changed your receiver. So that's what it means to manifest. And we could talk about that more, but that is basically the like bottom line of manifestation.
I love the way that you've just described that. And I'm just thinking, then how do we become a receiver? Because before we were talking about how a lot of the times we're literally a walking, talking, unconscious mind because of these repeating patterns, these, trauma, whatever that may be, that are constantly on autopilot. How do we change our frequency to become a great receiver so that we can manifest whatever we want to manifest out of life?
So what's really helpful and really encouraging to know is that when we look at and when we study the brain and the body, which 30 years ago, we couldn't do that. We can do that now. And what's really encouraging is to understand that we can change that in seconds. So we don't have to be stuck in it. The default is that you'll wake up in it. You'll wake up memorizing the emotional addictions that you had yesterday. And then it will put you in a fog and you'll think the way you thought yesterday. And then because you feel and think what you felt and thought yesterday, you'll do what you did yesterday, which means you'll have Groundhog Day. But because of the neuroplasticity and because of how powerful your consciousness is, if you are able to memorize your way back to your center, to the part of you that is bigger than the mind, and you develop a practice, right? Then you start to actually become more familiar with what it feels like to really be you than to be the version of you that is wounded, that is a fake identity. And so for me, you know, it started with living, immersing myself. Living in Jerusalem is such a different way of living, right? Like I live in Los Angeles right now. It couldn't be more different, except for the weather is kind of similar. It's like dry and beautiful. But other than the weather, it's extremely different, right? Like I immersed myself, and I'm sure this was true for like Liz Gilbert when she went on her Eat, Pray, Love journey. She immersed herself, took herself completely out of everything that reminded her of her past self, and put herself in India and put herself in Italy, where she was just having a very different experience. So that's one way to do it, right? And that you can do in little bits, right? Every year I go on a week-long silent meditation retreat, and boy, does that clear the browser history. So those things are possible. You can also decide to take a retreat from the past by taking a 5-minute meditation break in the morning. And there are so many free apps to do that. And there are so many ways to do that. I think that it's a matter of making a decision to stop going unconscious and therefore making it a habit, right? The same way that we all brush our teeth every day because we made a decision that was pretty powerful, that somewhere along the way we learned that that's just going to have to happen. Like we're going to have to take 3 minutes in the morning and 3 minutes at night and brush our teeth. Like that's not an option not to do that. And we've sort of figured that out with our health. You know, more and more people understand if you don't take care of your health in your 40s, you're going to pay for it in your 60s, right? So we're starting to take care of our microbiome. We're starting to do that. I think that there's a sense of hygiene that has to become a very important, just fait accompli decision where you say, from now on, and here's what I would say to be convincing. Whenever you meditate or you do something that puts you in a state of ease, it feels really good. It really does. And so then the question you have to ask yourself is, why would I deny myself feeling good? And the reason is just because your body is addicted to feeling bad. And so very often when you tell yourself, gosh, you know, I would love to take a walk, but then you don't. You work and answer 10 more emails instead of taking a walk. Why? Because your body says to you, don't take a walk. Do more of the stuff that creates cortisol and stress because it's familiar, because I'm addicted to it. And I think that the more we get how that works and how our body is actually up against us, we will force its hand. And so now you won't be sort of taken on the kite that is your body, but rather you will fly the kite. You will decide. And I think that that has to become really like cemented. And what helps that happen is accountability. So similar to like, if you want to get sober, find a sponsor, right? Don't do it alone. Do you want to get off sugar? Find a friend, check in with a friend for 30 days. I would say if it makes sense to you to start to live a life that feels more like flow, more like ease. And in order to do that, you're going to start to do a practice. I would find somebody to keep me accountable. And that's why I think listening to certain podcasts or making a habit out of attending certain coaches' workshops, like they're worth everything. If you find someone who puts you in that resonance, I would keep tuning into it. And then, of course, I'm so happy to kind of give you some practices right now that people could do.
I would love that.
So one thing that I think is really easy, and it takes about 90 seconds, is the same way that I selected what I was going to wear today, the same way we all select our clothes, we get to select our thoughts. And so what I like to suggest is that when you wake up in the morning, you're about to go into your closet and choose what you want to wear based on how you want to feel, right? Like I chose this top today because I hosted a workshop earlier and I wanted to feel a certain way and put on my big earrings and it just makes me feel really delicious. Great. What about selecting how I want to feel for the day? And so one thing I say is, all right, close your eyes for 90 seconds and ask yourself, what do I want to feel today? What would ease feel like? What would joy feel like? What would creativity feel like? What would play feel like? What would being sexy and in my body feel like? And you pick one, and then you keep your eyes closed for 90 seconds and memorize how good it feels to feel ease. And picture yourself going through your day, mentally rehearsing how it feels to feel that feeling, and open your eyes because you'll be surprised how that changes the trajectory of your day when you start to memorize your way back to how that feels. And the other thing that we can talk about is thinking errors and how we manifest in terms of abundance and things like that, because I think that there are a lot of things that can bring us a tremendous amount of joy and flow that we are just really practiced to not do. And so I'm happy to share that as well, because by taking a few of those steps every day, it keeps us in that flow.
Absolutely. As you were talking about manifestation, I was thinking, I wonder what your tips are. Is it a vision board? Is it journaling? Is it? So I'm loving these tips because it's almost like setting an intention of how you are going to set yourself up for the day, but you're tapping into that emotion, which is really powerful. I'm going to do that. I don't do that. So I love it.
I
So
love
any
that
others? Yes,
too.
please.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I don't really go into the world of like vision boards, although I've like done that with a friend a couple of times and I can see why that's really fun and it's lovely to like look at beautiful things and I really see the value in that. But I think for me, what I like to remember is what we started with in the conversation about manifestation, which is that there's nowhere to get to. It's already here. So I think for me, what I want to remind people, and my book is coming out in December and I just finished it, and I talk about this in the first chapter. What we want to manifest in our life is not a pile of things. We're not interested. We think we are, but we're not. We have way bigger dreams than that. So you could make a vision board of a boat and a beautiful dress and a house in the Hamptons. I don't buy it because I know a little bit about what really makes us tick. And we didn't come to the world for a pile of things. We want to manifest a mystical experience, the feeling of transcendence, connection to the divine, feeling connected to other people that we love. We want to manifest the feeling of meaning and purpose. We want to feel creativity flowing through us, excitement, enthusiasm, joy. That's what we want to manifest. And that's not on a vision board. And that is available right now. So there's nowhere to go. It's already here. So for me, what I want to manifest is being available to feel it more. But every single second of every day, I'm plugged into life force. I'm plugged into the oneness of all. I'm plugged into the divine. So it's up to me to return, to come back to that centered place. And then I feel full. And so I think one of the reasons why I like teaching manifestation and one of the reasons why I've been able to manifest a lot of beauty in my life is because I never set out to manifest something that was somewhere else. And I never felt like I had to be patient until it comes because all of that's an illusion. Instead, it was about deeply opening up to that lotus within, right? And then you feel you are love. You are love and love is you and it's running through you and you have it to give. And that's the best feeling in the world. And then when you are walking being of love and wholeness, you bump into synchronicity, you become a magnet. And then you do wind up with lots of piles of things, but you don't need them. And then you wind up stewarding them and giving them away and enjoying them as well. But it's not about a vision board, because what you really wanted was something way bigger. You want the feeling that when you're watching a movie and somebody just fell in love and they're walking down the street, that's what you want, right? So I think we forget that. And then what we do is we think that if we have these piles of things on our vision board, we will feel those feelings I just talked about once we get those things, but we never will get them then, because we don't create from lack, we create from wholeness. So only if we're whole will we 3D print things in our manifested life that are a reflection of how much abundance there is on the inside. And so it's really the opposite. It's really about deeply manifesting and tuning into the fullness and wholeness that's available within us than it is about something outside of us. But what will happen every single time is that when you are feeling that full, whole, gorgeous signal of Wi-Fi running through you, everything will become part of your life, because energy creates matter. Matter doesn't create energy. So when you are fully in flow, you won't have a problem receiving and having tons and tons and tons of beautiful things and money. And then we can talk about why people actually don't have those things, because there's a good reason, because very often people have a horrible relationship with money, and you won't allow yourself to have more of something that you actually are afraid of. So that's a whole other gorgeous conversation that we could have about why I love to manifest whatever there is to find beauty in, whether it's more relationships, more love, more money. It's all a gorgeous bounty that I'm just available to receive. I don't have a stop block on receiving money because I don't have an issue with it. So I like to help people with that, because I think that most people are walking around in an abusive relationship with the way they see money, and it's keeping them from experiencing it.
I've got so many questions that have bubbled up. So first of all, I do have a vision board purely because from my research anyway, from my understanding, the unconscious mind speaks the language of pictures. And so I do it more so to keep me on track. So for example, if I go, okay, from a business perspective, these are the 3 things I'm going to focus on. It might be growing the academy, whatever that may be. And so what that helps me do is keep me on my path. If somebody comes to me and says, hey, Catherine, let's do this together, I might look at my vision board and go, is that aligned with where I want to be or what I want to achieve by this year? Then I will say, I have to kindly say no. So that's why I use it. So I'm curious, you don't have any goals? You just go with the flow? Like, because I agree with you, because a lot of the times, if it was me manifesting a house in France, it is about a feeling of freedom. It's not about the house. It's about the feeling. So I totally agree with
100%.
that.
100%. And first of all, I like learning from other people. So I really am enjoying what you're saying, and I'm enjoying taking that in. So I love that we do it a little bit differently, because I think that there is so much juiciness in all of these options. And when you just asked me that, it's a great question. And it's like a yes and a no. Like, the answer to your question when you said, so you don't have goals, you just go with the flow. The answer is yes, you said that correctly. I don't really have goals and I just go with the flow. Correct. And I think because I have a meeting with myself every morning and I send one invitation, and it's to God. And I say, where would you have me go? What would you have me do? What would you have me say? So I don't like being in control of those goals. I just want to be in service, and I want to feel great, and I want to feel meaning, and I want to be of use, period. That's my goal. So every day I feel like I get to do that. So as long as I'm in alignment and I'm doing that, I feel really good and I'm in the right place at the right time. And I think because of that, I've been led to things that were never on my list. And that's a blessing, because I don't know that I would have known to choose that, because whatever I could choose would come from what I can see, which would come from the known. I sort of love playing in the potential of the unknown, and what's even greater that I would not think to put on my list that would allow me to be of the most use. And so I sort of surrender that, and I kind of can feel. And for me personally, being surrendered like that, and just kind of, my one goal every day is like, am I in receptive mode or am I in resistance? Am I in alignment? Am I following the path, or am I in constriction trying to control it? That's kind of all I kind of know about. It's like being in an airplane, and I've heard it said that when you're flying an airplane, the plane kind of flies itself. The thing that the pilot just has to do is keep it from drifting. And it just has to watch it and then bring it back, watch it, bring it back. I feel like that's my job. God's in control. The universe is way more magnificent and amazing and has so many more potentials than I could think of. So my idea is like, just keep my eye on, am I in the current? Am I saying yes to what I know is my next move? Because you can tell. I feel like God makes it so obvious when you are knowing what your alignment is. And it's about having the courage to choose it. We always know what the answer is. It's, do I have the courage? And so often, this is just my experience, the women that I coach, I've coached thousands and thousands and thousands of women over the last 7 years through the podcast and through courses and retreats. Very often, what happens is, because people want to control and predict the outcome, they have a hard time choosing their alignment. And sometimes the alignment says, burn it down, burn it to the ground. Sometimes the alignment says pivot. Sometimes the alignment says wait, do nothing. Sometimes the alignment says pause, right? So I think we have to be careful with how much we are at the wheel and controlling things, because what's more important is the alignment and listening to that. And that's really going on that alchemist journey and letting yourself be led by trusting to continue to always choose what your intuition knows is right. And we live in a culture, for the most part, where people don't want to be messy. They want to know. They want certainty. But there's something so fascinating. You know, Adam Grant said to me that in the expert's mind, there's an answer. There's one answer. But in the beginner's mind, there's many answers. So when we're too much in control and we have a goal, we're locked in on it, we sort of lose sight of what might be even more of the experience we're supposed to have, because we're so much. So I think what's fun to do is to put your ladder on the wall called, here's what would really excite me, and then be available for it to be even better, and to be available for it to change, and to really be willing to go with it when it changes. And I think if that's the case, you're going to get really far, because then you'll be excited and you'll be sort of leaning into something that feels like the next clue that's exciting. And then it'll lead you to the next clue when you're ready to see it. And as your vibration gets bigger, it might lead you to 3 other things that you never saw. I mean, Ram Dass, he was a psychologist. He went to Harvard, he wore a suit, and he followed the ladder to being very, well regarded, having gone to the best institution, until he said, I want out of this. There's got to be something way better than this. And so he burned it to the ground, so to speak, and found a guru and went to India and took off all of his accolades and prestige and sat in meditation and didn't know where that was leading him until he came out as a sage, and took thousands of people, hundreds of millions of people on a journey with him. And that's just one example. But I think that there's a push-pull to how much we know and how much our heart can direct us better when we stop holding on so tight. So that's what I would say is my answer.
Wow. My mind's going. So, because I'm obviously, you're an entrepreneur, I'm an entrepreneur, we have a business, and to me, it's how, could you talk about using your intuitive intelligence? And sometimes I know that in itself, it's like, hang on, am I allowing my intuitive intelligence to guide me, or is my mind getting in the way? Which it does sometimes. Absolutely. My mind will get in the way. And I have
So
this
does mine.
internal dialogue. But more so, I'm thinking of how do we, because you're talking about putting a ladder. So I'm a visual person. So when you're talking about a ladder, it's like, this is what I would like to achieve, but I'm open to receiving anything greater than what I've put on the wall here as a ladder, let's say. But then as an entrepreneur, I'm just thinking like, so then you obviously, because you're very successful, right? So you are very purposeful in what you do. So how does someone like yourself, very successful, using your intuitive intelligence without planning, but more so going with the flow and seeing where it guides you? I think that's because we're at the moment, we're in growth mode and we've been around since 2009. So it's the first time we've actually gone and said, hey, let's go out this way, which we've been very lucky. We've always had word of mouth. So we're very lucky, blessed, touch wood. But now we've decided to go out, and that's a big experience. So there's a lot of planning, a lot of setting goals. So I'm trying to apply your concept, which I love, but how, because I know there'd be other people listening to this that are also entrepreneurs or have a business. How do you apply that in a business sense, knowing there's certain things that you do need to, or targets that you need to meet?
So I love this question. I feel like we could do a whole podcast just on this question because I think it's really juicy, and I think it's where a lot of people spend their time wanting to understand how to unpack that exact sort of balance. And it is really fascinating because so much of what you just said, I'm allergic to it personally, but my team is not allergic to it. And then they have a hard time sticking with me. They're like, oh, there she goes again. She's moving, right? So I laugh because I know that is very, it's there's a reason why you shared that. And there's a lot of capable, smart, cool people who plug into what you just said. And I would just add, for whatever it is worth, that I am truly a living, breathing example of everything I said earlier. So what does that mean? I really believe and know and operate from wherever my energetic capacity is, I will receive as it is a match to that, period. So that for me is all the planning I need to do. And I think it's very powerful because I think when you're planning something, let's say you're planning a podcast launch, or you're going to launch a course, you're going to do a retreat, you're going to post something on Instagram. Does it really matter what microphone you use or what the structure of the podcast is or how many times you put a Facebook ad up? What makes it move is the frequency that is coming through it, right? It's the power in the resonance. So you can do a lot of this sort of like what I would call the masculine approach, which is a lot of this like strategic planning, or you can come in like the feminine, just fire, which that makes the quantum leap, right? Because it's energy that moves in the field. Matter has very little effect on the field. I mean, I went with Dr. Joe Dispenza and a group of about 12 of us to a laboratory at UC San Diego, and we looked at pancreatic cancer cells inside of an incubator. And then they had a group of super meditators, not me, but a group of super meditators go in the room. We closed the door, and they focused love and energy, coherent, loving vibration on this incubator with the pancreatic cancer cells. And what happened? They changed the cells. So you're talking about energy changing a cell, right? Healing something into life. And we don't think that it can work in a business? What are we talking about, right? So I don't put much stock in strategy. I put a lot of stock in resonance. So I'll tell you a story because you like visuals. So a few years ago during COVID, it was Christmas. And even though I'm Jewish, I love Christmas, and I have 3 little kids and they love Christmas music and Christmas movies. And I felt guilty that we were during COVID and we couldn't go anywhere. And it was so depressing for like a little while. And so I said to my husband, we're going to deck the whole house in Christmas lights and like Christmas Vacation, like crazy lights, Griswold style. And he was like, you're not going to be able to do it. And I thought, oh, he's just being such a Debbie Downer. It's so annoying. He's always like that. So I go and I buy thousands of dollars of lights. The house is it's like 7,000 square foot house. This is our house that we have in Florida. So I hire the guys, and there's like blow ups in front. There's like a gingerbread house and a reindeer, and I mean all the lights you can think of. And they string them, and it takes them all day and all night. It takes them 2 days to get all the lights on. And then the next day they're going to turn them on. And they go to turn them on, and they're on for about 10 seconds. They're so pretty. And then they're off. So I go and I try to trip the fuse, and they stay on for 5 seconds and they go off. Next thing I know, they just don't turn on at all. So I say to my husband, what the heck is going on? He goes, well, now the refrigerator's out. The computer blew upstairs. And I go, why? What's happening? He goes, I told you you cannot do it. I said, why? He said, because the house doesn't have enough wattage. It can't hold it. It's in the breaker. It's as simple as that. So I said, that makes no sense. He goes, no, it makes all the sense. Come with me. Come to the garage. So he shows me in the breaker how much electricity the breaker can hold. And it already has like the lighting for the house. It has the refrigerator, the appliances. And he goes, and then it has this much extra. You wanted to put in this much extra. It cannot hold it. It doesn't have it. It doesn't have it to hold. So I said, oh, that's what you meant. He said, yeah, that's why I said to you on December 22nd, don't go and spend this money, because before Christmas, we're not going to be able to get an electrician to add more voltage to your panel. It's just not going to happen on December 24th. And therefore, you won't be able to put up Christmas lights. I learned so much from that, because that's essentially what I teach. No matter what you try to do strategically, I went and got the lights, right? I'm trying to put them on, hiring the guys, right? We're putting it all. That's on a 3D level. On a 5D level, quantum level, it couldn't hold it. It didn't have a vessel to hold it. So it's not going to work. So what most people do is they focus on the strategy, but energetically, they don't have a capacity to hold it. So it goes back to your work, our work, my work is, do I have the capacity to override my ego and feel into an endless, infinite source that is bigger than me, that moves through me, right? The word currency comes from the word current. So money, just like any source, it needs to be moving, right? Which means I'm not even here to hold it and receive it. I'm here to move it. It's supposed to move through me. So when I move out of ego and I move into oneness, I can just receive. And then if I start a podcast, send an email, it will work to that same extent, period. So for me, I don't care about that stuff. It doesn't seem to affect me. What affects me is, am I really available to receive or not? And that is a spiritual, internal work. And to me, that's what makes the world go round. To whatever extent we are a vessel and we have the ability to receive, which is what I learned years ago.
That makes a whole lot of sense. I've just had an etheric slap. So thank you, Cathy. That was amazing. I'm conscious of your time. I just wanted to ask one little question. We talked about money because it is one of those things that I have looked into ancestral trauma, because looking at I'm very much a giver. So as soon as I receive money, I keep giving it away. But I see the pattern in my family. And we looked into it, or I looked into it, and I looked into my grandfather's parents were murdered. So what they did is they were saving money to go and see their son in a very small village in Italy. And then obviously they were excited. They were telling everyone, and a man broke into their house, took all their money, murdered them. And my grandfather was waiting at the station, waiting for his parents, who never arrived. And you can see this trauma. It's like, we don't want to hang on to money because money is like, it's gonna kill us. We'll get murdered. But we all have this, like, we give it away. So I love the fact that you were talking about, when you were talking about manifestation, a lot of it also depending on money blocks, right? So how do we, because obviously from my understanding, the more that we get into our greater self, that internal work you're talking about, getting in touch with your heart, with your light, being more authentic and standing in your truth, do these dissipate, these money blocks?
Totally. That's what's so beautiful about it. We can totally change it. And Just like we've changed other beliefs that we have. Sometimes people are afraid to date because they got hurt or their parents had broken up, and they learn to trust because they step out on a new belief and they put it to the test, and they learn that they can trust, and then they find new evidence that maybe not all men leave, or whatever the belief was that needed to change. So yes, we can change it about money. I think that inherently the major issue that we have with money is the feeling that we are separate from one another, right? And what the story that you shared is it's just so sad, right? Because unfortunately, every single person has some version of a story where somebody hurt somebody else, and those things are just awful, and they're just so unbelievably sad when there is such intense, unnecessary pain like that. It's just very, very, very hard to even conceive of. And far be it from me to try to make a meaning out of it, because I'm not God, and I wouldn't want to cheapen such an important, horrific thing by coming up with some flippant reason. I don't know the reason. I can't even see past. We had to use glasses to see the eclipse, let alone Jupiter and Mars and the Milky. I mean, there's so much of this universe that I don't know, that I just don't understand all the things and why they happen the way they do. And at the same time, when it comes to money, I think one of the most difficult things is where the ego gets it wrong, is it sees us all as separate. And so it's like, if you were to look at a garden and you see something rotting in a garden, if you knew anything about gardens, you would be concerned that that thing would start to eat away at the rest of the garden, because it's one ecosystem. So too, if you see something thriving in one corner of the garden, you say to yourself, that's great. It's going to affect the entire garden in a positive way, right? And so we are each part of this oneness. And so instead of looking at it like, oh my gosh, if I have money, will somebody judge me? Or if I have money, will someone take it? Or if I have money, will I keep someone else from having money? It's like, no, we're all part of this oneness, and abundance creates abundance, right? And so if I plant a cherry tree and then have 1,000 cherries fall from it, I just created the potential for 1,000 cherry trees. If I paint my house, then not only does the value of my house go up, but my neighbor's house just went up in value because I bettered my house. So it's all connected. If I'm a woman making money and then I'm able to go take that money and put it in the marketplace, then I just made more money and more jobs for other people. Abundance instantly creates more abundance. And so I think that that's part of it, is understanding the oneness. And I think that also we inherently keep ourselves from it, because again, we don't have a relationship to havingness. We have a relationship to earning, but we don't have familiarity when it comes to the feeling of being at peace with receiving. And we don't have a lot of models of people who came before us who nourished themselves and felt satisfied and showed us that it's safe to have and enjoy and thrive. But every redwood tree was planted or born in order to thrive. It wasn't put here to suffer. Every one of us was meant, a dolphin's not supposed to have just a cup of water. It's meant to have an abundance of water so that it can just do its job in the ecosystem. And I think we are the only species in nature that holds ourselves back from thriving because we question whether or not that would take away from someone else. And I think the reason why things happen sometimes, like what happened to your family, is that somebody else believes that their abundance only comes through someone else. And therefore, they're willing to do anything, even hurt someone to that extent, to get their abundance, which somebody else took from them. But we each are connected to the divine. We're each connected to source. We're each connected to the universe, which means our real job is to constantly know that about ourselves and constantly be a model to point other people back to their own source of abundance. So that's what I would say. And there's so much more that I could say about it. Unfortunately, I have a call at 2:00, but I love the conversation, and I think that it deserves a lot more time.
Yeah, I agree. And look, Cathy, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. And
You're delightful.
I think we're going to have to get you back on the show, because I've got a whole page of questions here that I didn't even get into, but we'll wrap it up with 3 shiny golden nuggets. So what would be those 3 shiny golden nuggets that you would like to leave for our audience today?
Number one, you were born to be a master manifester. Number two, you are a masterpiece, a piece of the master. And number three, you have the capacity to receive an infinite amount.
Beautiful. I love all three. I can't thank you enough for your time, your energy, and sharing your wealth of wisdom. You're wonderful. I really, really enjoyed our conversation, and you've really, really very insightful. It's probably the best way I can
Well,
just.
I enjoy you very much, and I so appreciate that you had me on and woke up so early to make it happen. And I appreciate your beautiful questions, and thank you so much. Let me know when it comes out, and we will be happy to share it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Cathy, for your time. Bless you. Lots of love.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Bless you
Thank you.
too.
Bye bye.
Okay, bye. Bye.